Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is Tuesday morning, 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, and this is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes, and it's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. Chat room is open. I did pop the link into there. We've been talking about, for a couple months now, Robert Burney's webpage is called Joy to You and Me, looking at codependency, and this is the last portion of that. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate it, and I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private person doing my own blog talk shows here, and I'm a survivor of child abuse. So I really just wanted to be another voice speaking out. So I say this on every show so people know, that I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, and I'm just a private person who's just, speaking out against abuse and standing up for child rights and human rights, and also want to be another voice for survivors. And this show is really just my healing journey. It allows me to handle it in small, manageable pieces, throughout the week, right? So thanks everybody for being here. You have to listen at your own discretion, right? I mean, I'm talking about abuse, and it's a sensitive subject, and you may find it makes you uncomfortable, the topics of abuse. So if it makes you uncomfortable, you have to turn the show off, and it is your discretion to listen, and you have to be careful what you're listening to and know what's going to affect you and what may be not so good for you to listen to. It wouldn't hurt my feelings if you turned the show off. So use your own discretion. And young people under the age of 18, just, I ask that you have someone listen to the show with you to help you decide whether or not you should be listening, because children really, you need to learn how to protect yourselves online, because it's a serious issue. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're fighting to stand up to save children's lives. We're all volunteers, but we're working really hard to promote awareness and education regarding child abuse, and we promote online safety. So you need to learn how to keep yourself safe if you're under the age of 18. Type into your browser internet safety for children, online safety, and it'll bring you to websites that'll give you some really good tips on how to keep yourself safe online, right? So important. So we'll get right into this, and this is from Robert Burney's webpage. It's called Joy to You and Me, but his website is www.joy, J-O-Y, the number 2, MEU.com, /codependency2.htm. And we're just looking at the very beginning of this last portion of the codependence part that he's gone into, and he's a codependence therapist, Robert Burney. He's a spiritual teacher. He's an author. He's written a book called Codependence: The Dance of Wounded Souls, and a lot of his quotes and excerpts from the book are actually on his website. So if you go and check it out, it's really good stuff. And the codependency recovery process is the last portion of this. So that's what we're looking at. It's a mental, emotional, spiritual, and yesterday we were looking at some excerpts from his book, and he says, in order to stop giving our power away, to stop reacting out of our inner children, to stop setting ourselves up to be victims so that we can start learning to trust and love ourselves, we need to begin to practice discernment. And he says discernment is having the eyes to see and the ears to hear and the ability to feel the emotional energy that is truth. So we were talking about that yesterday. He says in order to change our relationships with self and life, we need to focus on the mental and emotional levels while consciously working to integrate spiritual truth into our personal inner process. Mental attitudes and definitions, conscious and unconscious, create perspective and expectations which dictate relationship. So it's pretty deep, but it does make sense. What I perceive, and what my expectations are, conscious and unconscious, will dictate my relationships with people. And it says we learned about life as children. It is necessary to change the way we intellectually view life in order to stop being the victim of the old tapes, those old videotapes or tapes that roll, those roles that we took on and were forced to play as children. Those so many different types of roles, and it's quite interesting to look at the different roles. He might have some of that work here, I don't know, but I know John Bradshaw does, and John Bradshaw, he's also a codependency. I don't know if he's a therapist, but he was written a book, and codependence. What's it called? I can't think of it now. John Bradshaw. Anyway, he's got some good stuff. I wanted to read this one book that he has out about codependence, and I can't remember the title of it right now off the top of my head, but we did go over some web pages sort of talking about John Bradshaw's work. But Robert Burney has a whole sort of a different way of looking at it, and that's because he includes the whole spiritual aspect of the whole thing, so it's quite interesting. But he says by looking at becoming conscious of our attitudes, definitions, and perspectives, we can start discerning what works for us and what does not work. We can then start making choices about whether our intellectual view of life is serving us or if it is setting us up to be victims because we are expecting life to be something which it is not. So I think that's quite interesting, and we were really talking about that yesterday. Whether what we're doing, is serving us, our beliefs, our belief system, our behaviors, our perceptions on things, and our perspective and everything else. Is it serving us, or is it causing us to remain, in this victim role that we had to play for so long? And he says perspective is a key to recovery. And he talks here about his own stuff. He says, I had to change and enlarge my perspectives of myself and my own emotions, of other people, of God, and of this life business. Our perspective of life dictates our relationship with life. And we have a dysfunctional relationship with life because we were taught to have a dysfunctional perspective of this life business. Dysfunctional definitions of who we are and why we are here. I think that's really interesting, and I like what he has to say there because it's so true. Growing up in a dysfunctional home, sometimes there's no abuse. Like some people have grown up around a whole lot of dysfunction without abuse. It's still very damaging. It's still very twisted and hard for people to get, to get healthy attitudes and healthy belief systems growing up around that. And especially if there was abuse involved, it's just that much harder to feel good about ourselves and to feel good about this life. And so it's quite interesting. It's very true. Our I don't know. I've heard people say stuff like, our environment really is what produces the outcome. You know what I mean? Like when you think about it, growing up in a family or in a home or any type of situation where, there's no love, there's no nurturing, there's no care, a lot of violence and a lot of, hatred and depression, possibly grief and sadness and sorrow, and not a whole lot of good stuff. Of course, the child is not going to thrive in that. They're just going to be a product of that environment, which is what I am. So, and what all my siblings are. So we could never really be happy about anything. And we used to try to pull it out, and we would try even as older adults, like go to my sister's for dinner and hang out and have coffee in the backyard, and she had a pool, and we would try to do the normal stuff, you know what I mean? But because we had been so jaded from so many years before, and lived this horrible, lifestyle that my parents created for us, it was a little bit, it seemed almost like false, because it was almost like a lie, you know what I mean? Like we weren't ever addressing the situations that we truly had to deal with and had to go through, because my sister didn't want to, she would never talk about anything. She was the oldest one. She was the oldest sibling, and I'm the youngest, so she was 18 years older than me. And so, we'd go and hang out and try to do the normal family thing and have barbecues and stuff like that. But she would always say, the minute that my parents showed up, she'd be like, okay, you guys are not going to talk about anything. You're just going to sit there and behave, because parents were always fighting. It didn't matter, like, where they were. They didn't matter if they were out in public or at home or wherever. And so she was like, no, this is my house, and you're going to behave and you're going to do what I say. Because she grew up in the same home I did. She was just tired of the abuse, and she said, this is my home, and you will respect what I want, my wishes, and you will not fight and argue over here. And sometimes my parents would, and she would be like, you do that again and you're not coming back, she was so wanting to have this normal, life, because she had created, after she moved out and got married, and she had created this world of control for herself, where she was in control of everything so that nobody else could ever hurt her again. But she never ever did address the situation or even get any help, really, for what she had gone through. She was abused as well, like all of my siblings, right? So it's pretty harsh, you know what I mean, that this is what happens, so many times I think survivors do that. I know I did for many years, put this stuff behind me. Actually, I thought I was okay, and I stuffed it all down. I didn't think too much about it in my 20s, like especially my late 20s, until I hit about the age of 28, 29, and my mother started to deteriorate emotionally and on every level, physically, emotionally. She was very sick and very ill and getting older, and she was in and out of the hospital and had so many things wrong with her. But her emotional well-being had completely deteriorated, and for this little bit of time, I mean, we actually sort of got along. We never ever did have a good relationship, but we were actually able to be in the same room without her trying to hurt me or me snapping back at her, you know what I mean, because of her abusive manner. And so even in my 20s, I kind of did some of that, where I sort of pushed it down and didn't deal with it. But the thing is, at the end of the road, looking back and coming full circle, to where I am today, which, or even 4 years ago, let's say, when I started my healing journey, I look back at that and I think, yeah, for a little while, I was able to fake myself out and to think, oh no, it's okay, all this is all good, Um, so we didn't have a good childhood, oh well, and I was sort of just rolling with it and going with it, and then realized 4 years ago that it's had such a huge, deep, profound effect on me that I really didn't even realize how much damage was actually done. I was like, wow, there would be certain periods of time in my life where I was experiencing a lot of grief or sorrow or pain or whatever in my heart, but I always bounced back from that and just thought, no, I can keep going, I can keep doing this, without ever addressing what the real issues were. So this whole dysfunctional perspective of life, unless we actually, take it out and look at it, for myself, like I'm not really, talking about anybody else here, but I'm saying myself, like, unless I'm willing to take it apart, which is what I've been doing for the last 4 years, and actually look at what happened, then I can't really correct my views or perspective on this life, or what my purpose is here, or what I'm doing here, or who I actually am. You know what I mean? If I'm not going to do the work on it, and it's hard. It's hard to do that work because it's sometimes very painful, and sometimes it's just that we don't recognize certain things. But I mean, I kind of like what he has to say there. Perspective is a key to recovery. So he had to change and enlarge his perspectives of himself and his own emotions, of other people, of God, and of this life business, which, just life, living, right? Our perspective of life dictates our relationship with life. Yeah, so our perspective of life, if life is bad and life is horrible, then, that's what it is. We create that for ourselves. It was created for me as a child, but, as an adult, I have to learn to undo that, and to undo those old belief systems and old perspectives. And I think that's the key, you know what I mean? And that's really what's working for me, to be honest with you, is just changing some of these attitudes that I had, and some of this belief system stuff that I had, which was, that I was not worth anything, and I was just kind of, I don't know, a bad person, just because I was told I was a bad kid, and I grew up to be a bad person, and that I don't count, I don't matter, and that, that I'm just an ugly person, and all this stuff. And this is all stemming from my childhood, right? So if I'm going to see myself in a positive light, then I really have to believe it, and I have to see it. You know what I mean? So I started to do that about 4 years ago, right? Really working on changing the way I felt about myself, and changing the way I felt about this life, that I've been given. And it has helped. It's taken a long time, to go through and work through each piece of it. But I believe that what Robert Burney says is really pretty good. I think it's quite accurate. We have to change how we feel about things, and I have to, it's hard because my old way of feeling was very much the victim, and now I don't feel the same way. I feel more like a survivor. And so I think that in itself was a huge difference, because I had always been feeling like a victim, and up until I started my healing journey, I realized then when I started the healing journey that I'm a survivor, and I was like, wow, no, I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a survivor. And I never used to go around saying I'm a victim. That's just not my style. I was just always feeling so down and so angry and so unhappy about what happened in my childhood, what happened to my family. And so I was feeling victimized, let's just say. I never really called myself a victim. I just didn't call myself anything. I just, was just going along with it. But the thing is I changed that whole perspective of just being thinking all this is, I'm just going to live and die this horrible life, I'm just never going to find peace, never going to find happiness, never going to find joy, and be happy to be here and be comfortable. I was talking about that yesterday. Just being comfortable to be in my own apartment, just being comfortable in my own skin, huge issues. And I realized, I thought, man, I'm going to have to really work on that and change the way I feel about myself, and being how I feel in my own skin, and how I feel about this world, and that's what happens, to so many people when they're not given those very basic fundamental tools to work with as children, to learn to accept ourselves, love ourselves for who we are, learn to change things that we can, that we can work on, not judge ourselves by other people's, successes, and not judge ourselves by other people's, sort of what they're doing, and just stay focused on what we are doing and what we want to do and reach these goals and dreams. And I think, a lot of times we hold ourselves back. I know that many times I do, just because of what I've been through. Quite often will hold myself back because I'll create every kind of excuse or reason why it won't work or why, why that's not going to happen, right? Because I'm not used to having anything good happen, right? So, but I keep going anyway because I'm like, well, there's an opportunity, there's a chance that something good could happen. And so by doing that, lots of good things have happened, because I've allowed myself to think like that. So we do have to change the way we think and the way we feel. I hear people say stuff like all the time, like certain people will just be so down and they'll just, all they ever say is, oh, this life sucks and, oh, poor me. My mother was like that. You know what I mean? She was always miserable. She never had a kind word for really anybody. She was just always so down, and it was all about her. And so when we were growing up, she was always, oh, you damn kids, you're just so rotten. You're just ruined my life, and I hate you, and I hate your father. And, we'd have to listen to this. And then once in a while she'd make cookies, probably every other day or so. She'd make cookies, and she'd be like, here, you want some cookies? And then that night she'd be like, I should have killed myself years ago, and I should have killed you. And then, the next day she'd be like, oh, here's your laundry, you have to do, here's your clean clothes. And then that night, oh, I should have just killed you, and back to the same old thing. My mother was manic depressive, right? So she could never, ever pull herself out of this, this deep funk that she was always in. She could vary momentarily, like for little bits of time. She'd go to somebody's house and have a great time, one of her friends, play cards and have coffee and whatever, sit around smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, having a good time. And then she would get home and the reality, right, the reality would set in. Because those little moments of time for my mother were so precious, right, because she was able to get out of her head, get out of her space, and be with friends. And she didn't have a whole lot in her life to be happy about. But the thing is that she would never take responsibility for the fact that she was one half of that relationship with my dad, and she was one half of the culprit, one half of the abuser, and she was one half of the responsibility for the pain and the destruction that he caused our family. And so she was always the victim, always blaming everybody else. Oh, it's everybody else's fault. She would say stuff like, your father, he's hurting the boys. He's always hurt the boys, and he's always hit them in the head. And I told him never to hit them in the head. And she would say stuff like this to me. And then she would clobber me in the head with a roller pin. See, like in her mind, I don't know if she was dissociative, or I don't know what was the matter with her really completely, but I know that she was mentally ill. And, she could bash me in the head and slap me around. She was quite often hitting me in the head and, knocking me into cabinets and hurting my head and hurting me. And then she would say stuff like, well, it's your father. He's always hitting the kids in the head. So she was just always blaming my dad for everything, and she was never the one that had the problem. And it's really funny because when they got brought up on child abuse charges, all the older siblings had to go to court, and they had they were actually going to talk about the abuse from my parents, and my mom was saying it was all my dad, and the siblings said, no, our mother's abusing us too, right? So my mom got busted too. So they brought them both up on charges. So there you go. It wasn't just all my dad, and even though he was the other half of that responsibility, for creating this unsafe, unholy, horrific, evil life for us, that we thought that this life was just absolutely horrible, that you couldn't trust anybody, and that this life just sucks. And my belief system growing up was that this life was just harsh and horrible, and it's no wonder growing up the way that I did, especially at home, and then the city that I grew up in, which was horrible, and the schools that I went to, which were horrible. So I understand why these kids out here today have a hard time. But it's we have to then turn that around. If we've been forced to, sadly enough, to endure that, it is our responsibility as adults. As children, there's not much you can do. But as adults, it is our responsibility to change the way we feel. Nobody else can really do that for us. You know what I mean? We have to recreate our world, pretty much. We have to recreate our whole existence, because we have to go back and start where it should have been done so long ago, that we learn to accept ourselves, to love ourselves, to feel good about this life. Obviously, we know there's problems in this world. Everybody does. And, you'd have to be, I don't know what would have to be matter with a person if they didn't look around and see that there's problems in this world. But with who we are to ourselves, we can change that. We can't change a whole lot of other stuff, but we can change the way we feel about ourselves. And so that's why I think this stuff from Robert Burney is really good. It's very, it makes sense to me because he's just getting to the root of the whole thing, which is just looking at our, at what we can change. And what we can change is how we feel about ourselves and about this life and about this world. You know what I mean? I know it's a horrible place for many, many people. Obviously, we've been there. But I can still find joy. I can still find good things in this life. And that's what I was talking about yesterday, really, was my brothers couldn't see that. They couldn't find that. There was no good stuff in their life at all. They couldn't even see it at all. And they had opportunity to see it just like everybody else. But they didn't want to see it. Maybe they just didn't want to see it. And that's a sad place to be because that's exactly where my parents were. They couldn't see that they had these lovely children. Like my parents never ever got us, took us anywhere together and said, we just love our family. Let's go get a family photo or, gathered us around for Christmas and now have us all sit in the room and, say things like, we just love our family. You guys are just the best gift ever. And, they would never ever say a good, kind thing to us at all. They would be like, this is just a horrible family and we hate you and you kids are just bad and you're horrible and you're ruining our lives, you're ruining my life, my mother would say. She didn't want kids, right? And my dad would just be like, you're all heathen, you're all going to hell, you're all evil and you're going to burn. And, I should kill you for God. He would like that. My dad was very much into that kind of stuff, saying that he should kill the whole family because we were evil and that none of us were going to go to heaven. We were all going to hell and he should kill us because God would be pleased. That was my dad, right? Growing up with my dad. So lovely, you know what I mean? So then I grew up thinking, oh my God, I'm just evil. I'm a heathen. I'm a no good child. So what did I do? I turned to drugs and alcohol and was running around in the streets and doing hurtful things and hurting people and trashing property and getting into small trouble. Just not caring, no regard for life, no regard for my own life. I really didn't want to hurt other people. And sort of lived an extremely dangerous lifestyle for many years because of that. And, didn't care if I died, right? So that's the life my parents set up for me. So then I had to change that. If I'm going to live, I thought, man, if I'm going to live past the age of, 30 or 25, I'm going to have to, straighten up. I'm going to have to figure it out because nobody else is going to be able to do it for me. But I did some work in my 20s, obviously, just to be able to get where I got in my 20s. But I didn't really do any real healing work until just 4 years ago at the age of 41. So that's the whole thing. I mean, it's really a harsh reality to wake up one day and realize that, man, I have to go back and undo all this garbage that I had to face as a child and have to go back and unlearn it and then learn healthy ways of living and healthy belief systems and healthy stuff that's good, positive, and have some positive energy and positive flow in my life instead of just a whole lot of negativity and a whole lot of anger and hatred, right, which was killing me, literally just killing me because it was just too much all the time, right? And so it's kind of harsh. So he says it is kind of like the old joke about three blind men describing an elephant by touch. Each of them is telling his own truth. They just have a lousy perspective. Codependency is all about having a lousy relationship with life, with being human, because we have a lousy perspective on life as a human. And he says the more we enlarge our perspective, the closer we get to the cause instead of just dealing with the symptoms. For example, the more we look at the dysfunction in our relationship with ourselves as human beings, the more we will understand the dysfunction in our romantic relationships. And as we stated earlier, he says here, our perspective of life dictates our relationship with life. And this is true for all types of relationships. So our perspective of God dictates our relationship with God, and our perspective of what a man or woman is dictates our relationship with ourselves as men or women, and with other men and women. And our perspective of our emotions dictates our relationship with our own emotional process. So it's quite interesting. Changing our perspectives is absolutely vital to the growth process, he says. And we need to be willing to let go of, surrender our ego's definitions, belief systems, expectations in order to change our perspective of life, and then we can make the choice to align our beliefs with the concept of an unconditionally loving God force. So he's talking a whole lot about the whole spiritual side of this whole thing. And I have a lot of guests here today. Thanks a lot for being here. I appreciate it. A lot of people listening. And I have Gypsy Witch here with me, my good friend Gypsy Witch down in Australia. And hello there. And glad you could all be here. But yeah, he's really taking a look at the whole spiritual side of this. And John Bradshaw was just more looking just at I don't know, the non-spiritual side, but it's quite interesting. So he says we need to be willing to let go of, surrender our ego's definitions, belief systems, expectations in order to change our perspective of life. And that's what I was just talking about, letting go of those old thoughts, so those old thought patterns, those old belief systems, and getting, finding something that works for us, that makes sense to us, that brings peace to our life and goodness and healthy stuff, right? He says the truth is that the intellectual value systems, the attitudes that we use in deciding what's right and wrong, were not ours in the first place. We accepted on a subconscious and emotional level the values that were imposed on us as children. Even if we throw out those attitudes and beliefs intellectually as adults, they still dictate our emotional reactions, especially if we live our lives rebelling against them. So, by going to either extreme, accepting them without question or rejecting them without consideration, we are giving power away. So that's quite interesting. I don't know, that's pretty deep for this time in the morning, but I'll have to do some thinking on that. But yeah, no, as children, we're just little sponges, little children are, and they just pick up what's around them. Whatever the environment is, that's what the child will pick up, and a lot of the belief systems, most of the belief systems, maybe not all, but I would say most of them would be a matter of environment. Whatever the belief system is in the environment, that's pretty much what the child will pick up, right? They will develop some of their own, but a lot of it will be because of what they see and what they experience, And so, if people go around saying, "Oh, this life sucks, this life is horrible, I'm evil, I'm rotten," well, it is ultimately up to you to change your world. You know what I mean? If all I'm going to do is go around and say, "Oh, this life sucks, I hate my life," I've heard people do this, and because my mother, like I was saying, my mother was one of the biggest culprits for that kind of stuff. My dad is still today. He's 88 years old and he's mentally ill, and he's always running everything down and himself down, and he's a born again Christian who loves God and loves the Lord, but yet he can't find any peace or any goodness or anything else because he's continually trapped in that old belief system that he had from so long ago. He won't get rid of it and he won't change it. And it very, very well just may be a chemical thing because he probably needed medication years ago. I don't know what the deal is, but poor guy, he can't find peace in this earth. He can't find peace in what, knowing what he did to his wife and his children. I suppose I don't know how a person could sleep. You know what I mean? But he seems to sleep quite well. So there you go. While his sons sleep in the grave. See, that's what always pissed me off about that whole thing, right? My dad has been quite healthy his whole life, and lived to be the age of 88, and his sons are in the grave and had these horrible lives, and he doesn't take any responsibility for that at all. And, he just doesn't care that he put them through hell so that they chose hell as a lifestyle, right? He just thinks it's great, because he would come home and, just call them names and trash them out and beat them up, heathen kids, and slap my brothers around and beat on them and kick them around and, call my mother a whore and all this stuff. And he sleeps at night, it's quite funny. But the thing is he's not going to escape judgment. Nobody will. So there you go. But anyway, So he says we accepted on a subconscious and emotional level the values that were imposed on us as children. So even if we throw out those attitudes and beliefs intellectually as adults and say, well, I know better now because I'm an adult and blah, 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 they still dictate our emotional reactions. So that's quite interesting. That's what he says. So especially if we live our lives rebelling against them, by going to either extreme, accepting them without question or rejecting them without consideration, we are giving power away. So that's quite interesting. He says, in order to stop giving our power away, to stop reacting out of our inner children, to stop setting ourselves up to be victims so that we can start learning to trust and love ourselves, we need to begin to practice discernment. So he repeats himself here a bit. But he says we need to practice discernment, having the eyes to see, the ears to hear, the ability to feel the emotional energy that is truth. So just getting to the truth of the whole thing, and the truth of what our belief patterns are, the truth of how we really feel, and that's the thing. For so many years, people will just shove that down somewhere so far down there they don't even know how they feel or who they are, And so many times people really don't know who they are, and they only see themselves one way, and they don't take the look at who they really are, It's really quite interesting. Thanks for being here, everybody. We'll finish this up. Tomorrow morning. I should be on my shows. I have an out-of-town guest coming, and so I'll be busy for about a week, but I think I'm going to try to be here in the morning still. Let me see if I can manage that. So we'll see what happens here, but I should be on tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll try to cancel my show. But you reach out. If you can't cope and you're having a hard time, you make sure you get some help, right? Do not allow yourself to suffer on and suffer alone. And you can do things like you can call crisis lines and just talk to people anonymously and whatever you want to do, but you make sure that you get some help. Don't suffer alone in silence, right? Have a great day, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.